Welcome to season 1 of Don't Touch My Podcast. Today, we're telling people, don't touch our drinks. Recently, the Boston police issued a warning Monday about numerous social media posts from various people claiming they were victims of drink spiking at local bars over the Memorial Day weekend. The Boston Police Department issued a statement reminding the public of the dangerousness of scentless, colorless, and tasteless drugs such as rohypnol, also known as a roofie, or other drugs such as GHB or ketamine, being placed in the drinks of unsuspected victims. These drugs and substances can cause disorientation, confusion, temporary paralysis, or unconsciousness, along with a host of other symptoms, leaving the potential victims vulnerable to the intentions of the subject. The department said, urging anyone who believes they were a victim to call 911 or to report the incident in person at any Boston Police District station. This was also reported to have happened last year, as well as more recently over the Memorial Day weekend at some local Worcester bars as well. In 1996, Congress passed the Drug-Induced Rape Prevention and Punishment Act as an amendment to the Controlled Substance Act. This amendment established federal penalties of up to 20 years imprisonment and fines for anyone convicted of committing a crime of violence, including rape, by administering a controlled substance without the victim's knowledge or consent. There are also state laws that may be used to prosecute these crimes. On February 18, 2000, the Hillary J. Farias and Samantha Reed Date Rape Drug Prohibition Act of 2000 was enacted by Congress and declared GHB an imminent hazard to public safety that required immediate regulatory action under the Controlled Substances Act. The act was named after Hillary, age 17, from Texas, who died in 1996, and Samantha Reed, age 15, from Michigan, who died in 1999 after GHB was slipped into their soft drinks. Today, we have a special guest. We have Nikki-Bell Peña of LIFT Worcester. Nikki, can you tell us about your organization and then give us a quick reaction to what I just read through?
Sure. Thank you guys for having me today. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you all. So my name is Nikki-Bell Peña. I am the founder and chief executive officer of a local organization called Living in Freedom Together, or LIFT Worcester. And we serve survivors of prostitution and sex trafficking, many of whom, I will say the majority of whom have experienced kind of a lifetime of violence. I myself am also a survivor of prostitution, trafficking, and many other forms of gender-based violence as well. My gut reaction to the increase in the drugging of unsuspecting victims is we have a real problem with gender-based violence as a whole, right? And I would actually probably contest that there's been an increase, but more so maybe an increase in reporting, because we know that sexual predators prey upon vulnerable people, and whether that is rendering them vulnerable by adding something to their drink, or preying upon vulnerable people just in general. And my also gut reaction to this is, I've been reading kind of through a lot of the stories and the articles related to the increase in this perpetration, and all of the articles really provide tips for women for how to keep their drinks safe, and it's still this very again, and maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, but it's still this, it seems to me, very victim blaming, right? You should cover your drinks, or you should go out in groups, and you should this, instead of saying men should stop putting drugs in women's drinks and raping them. How about we start there? And so that's kind of my initial gut reaction, enough with the women's safety tips of how we prevent sexual violence. We can't prevent sexual violence, only perpetrators can, right?
And that's a good point, because I think that that's one of my sentiments. I share the same thing with you, Nikki, in the sense that every time I read something, they're telling women what not to do, which means that they're basically just telling you, just don't go out. Don't live a normal life. Don't go out to the bars and enjoy yourself with friends. Don't, pretend to like a guy, because you know what happens after that. It's your fault if something happens. You've made that initiation that you felt like you were interested. Everything is always the woman's fault. It's always the victim's fault, I should say. And I feel like those articles, I probably have read the same ones, and where they're doing the same thing. And not on top, and not only that, but for me, what bothers me the most is that there's this idea that it's normal. These things happen, right? The three of us have spoken prior to this, and we saw a quote somewhere from a local bar, and the general manager just basically said, these things happen everywhere, and it's just unfortunate, but it's just the way the world works. And I personally think that's a lot of bullshit, because I don't think that's the way the world works, and we should never conform to a world that victimizes women and subjects them to things that they don't want to participate in. So for someone to say this is just how it works is basically saying this is okay. You have to be okay with these things because this is the way the world works. And I call bullshit on that. It's not. We need to start telling men, just like we're always telling women, we're raising powerful women, we're raising young girls to understand their worth and their self-worth, and to know what's right and wrong and how to protect themselves. We should be doing the same thing for boys and teaching them these are not the things that you do to women. This is not how you treat women. If you do see these things, speak up. You can save someone's life. And so it's always a shift. And I think that the message is so convoluted in our minds that most of these individuals saying these things think that it's coming from a good place. They're saying it with good intention. Like, this is just how the world works. God, I'm so sad. It's kind of like back to like the thoughts and prayer. It's thoughts and prayers. Like, I feel for you, but it just is what it is, and it shouldn't be. And I feel that, you work with a lot of individuals, Nikki, that probably have experienced this firsthand, and this has kind of been their gateway to a world that they never wanted a part of. And so I salute what you do. I'm a big fan of what you do. And I'd love to know, what else, like outside of what should we be telling like men, and what should we be telling our daughters? Like, what's the message that you think we should be saying, Nikki?
So I just want to jump in right before you do that and give you guys some statistics. So nationwide, 81% of women and 43% of men report experiencing some form of sexual harassment and or assault in their lifetime. 1 in 5 women in the United States experienced completed or attempted rape during their lifetime. And the one that was shocking but not shocking to me was about half, 51.1% of female victims of rape reported being raped by an intimate partner, and 40.8 by an acquaintance. So,
and if you throw in the stat of date rape, 80% of women, or 80% of rape cases, are due to date rape drugs.
Right. So and then wait, and the first thing that people always try to go to is, well, the person was drugged. How do they know? Or, how can we trust them? Or, honestly, the case that really upset me was the Bill Cosby case, where you have 40, 50, 60 women saying the identical same story. And it's like, well, why should we believe her? Why did she wait 40 years? Well, I think she waited 40 years because this is what she's getting at the end of 40 years. Even though she has 40 plus women standing behind her and saying, this happened to me too. I mean, we're talking about Beverly Johnson. Like, Beverly Johnson doesn't need any money. She has money. She doesn't need any money from Bill Cosby. Why would she lie about that? I mean, so many people, and these women, and you can see the emotion on their face, them reliving the experience, and we're still questioning whether or not they were victims. And, this says right here, the prevalence of false reporting of sexual assault crimes is low, between 2% and 10%. But if I can come in as a fully aware woman, no drugs, no alcohol, no nothing, and still get victim blamed, where does that leave a recourse for somebody who has been drugged and honestly probably doesn't even remember what happened to them, but now they have to live with the consequences of what happened to them, even though they don't really know. And that's part of it. They don't even really know what happened to them. And I couldn't agree with you ladies more about the victim blaming and this is how you should protect yourselves. Why don't we just tell, men and women too, not to rape? Like, why isn't that the conversation? Why is the conversation put on more clothes, cover your drink, go out with a group of friends, call an escort if you're walking at night? Like, why is that the answer? Why isn't the answer, as we talk about sexual education, like, why isn't that part of the education that our children are getting? How else are we going to end rape culture if it's not through education, empowerment, and understanding and empathy?
I think you've said so many important things there when we talk about like the number of cases that are actually reported. And then you take that percentage and you look at, and I don't know what the statistic is, but I know it's very low. The number of those cases that actually go to trial and a perpetrator is held accountable is probably like,
And how long do they go to jail, right?
Yes.
Like, held accountable goes to jail for 15 months and then gets visitation with the kid they made after they raped you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I don't understand it.
I don't understand it either. And I feel like, and we do this with like lots of problems in our world, right? Like, we're like, oh, sexual violence is too big of an issue. I'm just going to throw my hands up and do nothing. And it's like, well, that's super helpful, right? Racism is too big of a problem to address. So I'm just going to not do anything, right? And it's like, great work. Thank you. And so it's about, like, I think getting people invested and, believing survivors. I watched the Cosby documentary as well. And the reality is like, victims don't come forward and report crimes against them because it's fun or they typically have something to gain, right? It's actually a really brutal process to go through the investigation process, have to relive all of that trauma and the details. And the reality is the burden is always placed on the shoulder of the survivors to prove what happened to them, right? Rather than, looking at the perpetrators of these crimes, right? It is always placed on the shoulders of victims. And like our justice system is not just anyways, right? It's just the reality of it. And so, I even look at some of our women, even myself, it's like, I am not a good victim in the court's eyes, right? I have a history of prostitution, a history of substance use, a history of arrest, and victims get torn apart on the stand. That's the reality of it, right? Torn apart and blamed. So it's like, when people are coming forward about allegations of abuse, it's because they're true, right? And I always find it so interesting that in like Sexual Assault Awareness Month or Denim Day, right? People are like posting these convenient hashtags of like believe survivors, right? And it's like, believe survivors, but only after the perpetrator is found guilty. But it's like, you know what I mean? It's like, so it's not really believing survivors, right? It's believing survivors when that's convenient and it works for you, right?
But I think women aren't even believed when the evidence is irrefutable, right? Like, if you think about domestic violence, for example, we've seen many celebrities literally videotapes of the assault, and still it's, oh, well, what did the woman do beforehand? Or, and like you said, you're not a good victim, but what's a good victim?
How do you
define and I don't think that because people have, because you may be involved first of all, nobody is out involved in the sex trade or out there selling themselves because they want to, right? So obviously that's a result of trauma, circumstances, drug abuse, like whatever is going on. That doesn't mean that you deserve to be sexually assaulted. That doesn't mean that your rights get taken away and somebody can do something to you without your consent. Like, it doesn't matter who you are as a victim. The only person that should be being judged is the perpetrator.
That's 1,000% true. I think that, so this is why I was saying earlier, in where I don't think, like, this is a culture that just doesn't, it will never go away. That's my true, honest belief. And because most of the time, 98% of the time, we're talking about exactly what we're talking about right now, right? Taking away the blame from the victim, because our society doesn't see this as morally wrong. And just like Nikki said, you can see that through the justice system. Just like Jennifer said, you can see that through the justice system because of the base of sentencing, right? How many frat boys we've seen get off because they have a quote unquote future, and so they're on probation for 30 days, or they've gotten 3 months, or whatever the case may be, and the woman has been brutalized, sexualized, raped, tormented, traumatized, and her life obviously means absolutely nothing because she gets no justice, right? Nothing for her is done properly through the justice system. The men are not being held accountable. And again, and like Jennifer said, this isn't just about, this is happening to a majority of women. Yes. Does this happen to men as well? Absolutely. This is something that does happen to men, but it's happening at an alarming rate against women. And most of the time it's being done by someone that we know. And that's the scariest part. Someone that we know. When we talk about, raising our children, we have to always talk also about raising our children and our daughters, and always mentioning, don't forget, just because XYZ is a family member or this person is this close, we still have to be very cognizant of our surroundings, right? And so it's like this culture that we just can't live down because it's been fed into our men for decades upon decades and centuries, that women are less than. We've been put on this earth to basically appease them and whichever format that matters to them. And we have no say in how that works, right? And I mean, you can see that at the very early of civilization, women were raped and beaten, and so many children were born out of wedlock because of these situations. And that kind of just carries on over century upon century, and it seems to just be getting worse, right? So I feel like we have to figure out as a collective society, where do our priorities stand? Is it with the individuals that think that this is okay? Because I mean, if you're looking at our Congress right now, we have gentlemen like Matt Gaetz running around, physical evidence against this man, and still holds a position as an elected official to represent the people.
Well, I mean, Giselle, look as far back as when Justice Clarence Thomas was confirmed. Anita Baker stood up there and told her story. They didn't believe her. Justice Kavanaugh, I don't remember the victim's name, but she stood up there and told her story, and she was ignored. And this man is now on the Supreme Court making
rules against women's bodies,
making laws against getting abortion. So I don't know if you guys remember this case back in 2016. It was an ex-Stanford swimmer. His name was Brock Turner, and he was sentenced to 6 months in jail for sexually assaulting a woman. He only served 3 months of it. And the judge said that he didn't want to give him a term longer than 6 months because it would severely impact his life. If you go to the statistics, they talk about rape victims over the course of their life losing over $200,000 between medical treatment and issues and depression and etc. They have a quote in this article from the victim of Mr. Turner, and she talks about being in the hospital and them not allowing her to shower. And then it says, after a few hours, they let me shower. I stood there examining my body beneath the stream of water and decided I don't want my body anymore. Like, and to your point earlier, Nikki, you were talking about how most people accused of rape are never found guilty. According to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, it estimates 97 out of 100 perpetrators avoid punishment. So only 3 out of 100 actually get punished, and then some of those are getting a 3-month sentence.
You know, we've been talking a lot at LIFT about kind of like root causes and how these like pipelines into poverty and prostitution and prison and kind of like all intersect. And, you know, we get a lot of questions around, you know, how do we support victims and even more so since we started our youth programming, how do we support young people impacted by the sex trade or prostitution or sexual violence? And it's like, it's too effing late, right? Let's take a step back and like, let's go upriver, right? And like, instead of like pulling these like dead babies out of the water, right? Let's go upriver and figure out how we prevent sexual violence from happening, right? And to your point, Giselle, you know, a while ago, somebody had shared this, you know, post on social media, and it was like, ladies, it's getting darker out later. Remember to never go to the ATM after dark. Always. And it's like, wait, what? Like, I have children. Sometimes I need to go to the ATM after dark. And sometimes I want to go out with my friends at night, right? Like, and it feels like we're very much going back to like, you know, the initial movement work around sexual violence, which was like giving women rape whistles. And if you thought you were going to get sexually assaulted, you were to blow this whistle and people were going to know to come help you. That was early rape prevention. Like, I'm not kidding, right? And so we haven't shifted away from that, right? It's still about how we protect ourselves. And I think it does go to like young boys and men and having those conversations. And, you know, when we throw our hands up in this way of like, oh, this is too big a problem, there's nothing we can do about it, we end up with people like Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, right? Like, this is what happens. And so it's so important that, you know, and when we look at even funding, right, for victim services, there is no money for prevention work. None. We do not invest in prevention work. And it's like almost like we don't want to interrupt the violence that's happening in predominantly women's lives. Because our goal at LIFT is to put ourselves out of business. We want to end prostitution and like not have to open these programs for women that have been brutalized and harmed, right? But it's like we built our nonprofits and everything around response instead of prevention, and there's no money for prevention. And it's like, even my son, he has this shirt and it's like, boys will be boys, right? And then it like is crossed out and it's like, no, boys will be feminist activists and allies, right? Like, that's who they will be. But we have to teach them those things, and it starts young. And it's around toxic masculinity, misogyny, like all, like, we need to be having those conversations with young people so they can work with us to dismantle those systems that are harming and rendering people vulnerable to sexual violence.
Exactly. It's about creating, respect and communication, because, rape is about control, right? And it's about controlling somebody else's body and emotions and safety and etc. And nobody should feel like they're entitled to that of another person. So like you said, I had a conversation recently with somebody about, sexual education and how, they're trying to put it into kindergarten and younger kids. And it was like, oh, I don't want my child learning about sex. And it's like, well, first of all, they're not, doing bong chicka wow wow. Like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, they're teaching them like, this is your penis, this is your vagina, like,
chicka wow wow.
Wipe from front to back. Like, they're gonna teach age appropriate conversation, but at the same time, it's teaching that this is your body And that's that person's body, and you don't have a right to that person's body. And is teaching those basic concepts very early on, because honestly, these kids are learning and seeing this stuff at that age. They're on YouTube. They're on, I mean, even us as adults, we go and watch a Disney movie and there's jokes in there for adults. And you're like, that's kind of, so they know, like they know these like there's those basic concepts of respecting oneself, respecting somebody else's space, asking for permission to touch another person. If the person says no, that means you can't touch them. Like these, like you said, this is preventative. This is teaching at anti-rape culture principles, and starting very young. And as a mother to two boys, like you said, you have a son, I'm a mother to two boys. It's my responsibility to teach them how to respect others. It's my responsibility and their father's responsibility to teach them to respect others.
Yeah, and on top of it, like
that's part of respect.
Yeah, and doing it early, like you're saying, Jen, is the key. I think that for a little bit of me feels kind of like hopeful with this generation that we have, and where they're so inclusive, they're so awakened to like the political movements, they're so motivated to like just make sure that everybody's feeling okay, right? Like I've never seen, and this is because of trauma, right? Because of our generational trauma that we put on our kids and so forth and so forth. They've been exposed to trauma very early on, and maybe not direct trauma, but indirectly through the experiences of other people. That is trauma. Having the kids see the mass shootings that happen at schools and 6-year-olds and 10-year-olds, like that's traumatic. I myself, as a 37-year-old, cried. I cried every day for like the last week, just watching the updates, right? So when I hear about like the rape, I tell the girls, you know, like this is what I talk about. Like this is what I'm trying to explain to you guys. Not everyone's your friend, and you know, in order for us to get away from this, it's like you have to educate your friends, and don't ever feel like you're not cool because you're doing that. You're doing the right thing. And so I think that this generation does give me a little bit of hope, in the sense that they are very inclusive, right? They want to make sure everybody's okay. They want to make sure that human rights are everybody's rights. And I feel proud to see them doing the work that they're doing, because no one's motivating them but the situations outside, the social factors that come into play, and they're taking that and saying no more, right? How many of these younger generations are against the patriarchy? How many of them are talking about women empowerment, like things that at my age I would have never even spoken about, you know? Now as an adult, because of experiences, yes, I'm a full-blown advocate for it, but at my daughter's age, I would have never been outside, like, you know, like fight the power, and like they're so just awakened to experiences that have made them have a really good perspective, I guess I want to say. And I know that sometimes we try to discredit our young people because they are young and they may not have experienced this themselves, or they haven't experienced life, you know, in full blown, is what people say. But this is a good thing, because they shouldn't have to experience these things to fight for them, right? I shouldn't have to have an abortion to fight for someone else to have the right to have an abortion. I shouldn't have to fight against racism if I haven't experienced. Like, that's the point. It's to minimize these interactions and these social injustices, so that way we can live in a better world, because I just don't understand who doesn't want to live in a better world. And I think these kids now have this really good mindset of like, I want that. We want that. We want environmental change. We want to break down and make sure that everybody has something, and the equality and all the inclusion. And I think that they're onto something. And I'm hopeful to see them, you know, really push. I mean, I've never seen younger people on the council. City councils are getting younger. Mayors are getting younger. I mean, I think it's going to take generations, but I think we're like in the right movement. We just have to keep like, you know, screaming for the rooftops, it seems.
But Nikki and Giselle, what do we tell people right now that are, you know, of, you know, college age or young and going out to the clubs and, you know, could potentially fall victim to a situation like this? How do we help them to not become victims?
you know, I know there are all those like rape prevention safety tips, but I think we help them by like talking to men in our inner circles and talking to our friends about fucking sorry, language, you can bleep that out. Stop raping people.
I mean, seriously, just stop doing it.
You know,
stop fucking raping people. I'm with you, Nikki.
You know, like, I think it's important. Like, I was just at, ironically enough, the conference on crimes against women in Dallas, Texas, which I was like, yeah, this is like super ironic that we're.
I was gonna say in Texas, that doesn't even seem like the right place for that.
But the reality is, like, since the domestic violence movement started, and you know, we haven't actually reduced instances of intimate partner violence at all. We haven't reduced the number, right? So it's like something like, yes,
because we're not believed, Nikki. We're not believed. The victims are not believed, and the penalties are not harsh. I mean, I love ID Network. Like every other episode is about some partner bumping off their so-called loved one because they feel slighted or something. Like literally every episode is nearly about some kind of intimate situation.
Yeah. And I also want to say, like, sexual violence impacts you in a way that, like, I don't know that you ever, like, I always like say that I will probably be recovering from the sexual violence that I've experienced for the rest of my life, right? Like, I think that's real
because it's so intimate to you. It's so intimate to you.
It's impacted who I am, and it's impacted how I show up in the world. It's impacted my self-worth. It's impacted the way I parent. It's impacted my relationship with my husband. I mean, it's like you're right. It's intimate and it stays with you, and it really like damages your self-worth and the way you show up in the world. And I think, you know, there's like two parts of it, right? Like stop raping women, and also like helping people to see their worth in the world. And like part of that is like undoing this rape culture and this victim blaming and this, because for a long time, I think why I got stuck in prostitution and the life for so long was because I didn't believe I deserved any better. And my community showed me that. The people that were buying access to my body showed me that, right? Like I was getting that message from everywhere. And it finally took like people seeing me as a human being and recognizing like, and helping me to see rebuild my own self-worth. So I think it's like two parts, right? It's like supporting people in their recovery from their victimization, and also like stopping the violence. And I think we have to do those things in tandem. And I love what you were saying, Giselle, about this younger generation being so aware and woke. And it's like, yeah, they are. And you saying like people don't have to experience it to say like, so you don't have to be a rape survivor to say like people shouldn't be raped, right? And like stop raping people. You don't have to. And it's like this younger generation like know what being an ally actually is like, and like watching that, it gives me hope as well, right? That like they are going to help us transform this world for the better, because the way we've been doing things isn't working, right? Like I said, numbers of violence have gone up. I mean, it's, we're opening more programs, but the reality is we can open programs till we die, and we're still not going to have enough space for all of the people that have been impacted. And I know we're talking about how this overwhelmingly impacts women, but I also just want to highlight that it's overwhelmingly almost always perpetrated by men. like
right, even when it's against other men.
Right, like
yeah.
And people are afraid to say that, right? It's almost like we can't say it's predominantly women and girls experiencing violence and it's predominantly men doing the perpetrating, but that is the reality of it. But we've been so conditioned to like not speak up against misogyny, patriarchy, and rape, right? Because it's men in positions of power that are perpetrating these crimes.
Well, I mean, it's the same as like you guys have related it to. It's the same as racism, right? Like I show up in the world as a Black woman. So when somebody says to me, I don't see color, then you're basically telling me you don't see me. Right. So if you're a victim of rape and you're showing up every day as a victim of rape and everybody's telling you it's not true, it's your fault, it's, maybe not in those words, but that's essentially what they're saying to you. How can you recover when you're not even getting believed to begin with? And you got to work through that. I mean, like I said, with race, if we say, oh, so-and-so treated me different, I think they treated me different because I'm Black. Then it's like, well, maybe it was this. So were you nice? Did you comply? Like that doesn't, you gave the guy the wrong idea. You were out at the club wearing a mini skirt, so that means give me drugs and rape me? Like, no, it means that I wanted to look cute in my mini skirt and I have that right.
Right. And on top of that, it's like, we're talking about educating the men, right? And I'm still kind of like really not kind of, but I am very disturbed by like our conversation that we had prior and like the responses from business owners and managers and bartenders. I was just listening to a podcast recently about unions, right? And they're talking about how they're unionizing bartenders and baristas and all these kind of things. For me, the first thing I thought of was this relationship from bartender to consumer, right? So if you're at a bar, because some of these conversations that we were reading articles, the women were saying, I don't even know how this could have happened.
Right, because I ordered my drink, whatever, yep.
So, for me, because I feel like I've grown into this mindset to be aware of, hyper aware to your surroundings, you wonder, is this part of like a game with the bartenders? Is this something that's company culture? Is this something that's behind this entire facade of a business? Because for me, for a company to come out and say things like, this is just the way of the world, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is, means that you're okay with it, which means that I, as a woman, don't feel comfortable going in there because I don't know.
You're not even willing to protect your customers. You're not even willing to protect your customers.
Agreed. So it's like, we're taking this and it really is, just like DEI training and racism, anti-racism training. It's the same facet. It comes from up here. If your company culture okays it, slips it on the rug, doesn't say, doesn't call out even the smallest sexual inappropriateness, because that's how it snowballs, then you are compliant with this kind of behavior. And so people need to be shut down just for that. Like, we should just be saying, as much as we hold, like these celebrities and all these people, oh, we're canceling them. We should be canceling local businesses. Shut them down.
It should go to the licensing commission. If they have, they should go to the licensing commission.
Agreed. If you have incidences that are happening in your establishment at a faster rate or a higher rate or whatever, way too many, one is one too many, but to not acknowledge it and it continues to happen, you need to be shut down. I don't care if you're, the mayor's favorite place to get a beer, shut it down. Because what's happening is that this could be, I always think of things like this could be a gateway to human trafficking. This could be an entire circle. And maybe that's me being paranoid, but I feel like this is how it starts. It starts with a little, rapport. Then it starts with, oh, this was just one incident. Oh, this is just two. They're unrelated. Who knows? And then behind that is a whole parade of people going through this. Just the other day, I was at a Marshall's, a Home Goods, and I freaked out myself. I was like on alert because I had this gentleman. I was in the women's area, like where they have facial mask and all of those things. The man had nothing in his hand. He had a cell phone, and he was kind of like hiding behind, like, the aisles a little bit, those in between aisles, and like looking over to me, right? And so every time he would do that, I felt like even more uncomfortable. But then I would have like an actual, like I was looking at him, I'm looking at him through my phone, like just so I can see and I identify. That's how uncomfortable he made me. And I would see that every time I moved, he moved. And every time I moved like further away, he would look around and then start texting, and he would move closer. And I was just like, and then all of a sudden, my husband came, and I told him, I felt so uncomfortable. I said, honey, like, this guy is weird. There's just something, like, I just don't feel comfortable. And, you know, my husband was like, oh, that's not going to happen. And I was telling my sister the story. I said, you know, this is, you worry. And I said, women shouldn't have to worry to go to Home Goods. It's fucking Home Goods. I want to get a facial mask for a cheaper price than I would at Sephora, and I have to worry about getting human trafficked by some random guy. So my sister tells me about, I'm telling her the story, and she tells me about this recent kind of human trafficking tactic, right? In where they're sending children to say, can you help me look for my mom in these department stores? Can you help me look for my mom? And it was brought to light by a woman who said, I wanted to bring the child up to the front desk and say, hey, we should put this on the PA system. What can we do? You know, as women, I feel like when we see a child, we instantly become very motherly and like, oh my God, let me protect this child from anyone that wants to do harm. There's a loose child, this child could go missing. The child insisted, no, I want you to help. I want you to help. No, don't bring me up there. It was like very sketchy. Turns out it was part of like this entire thing of getting women to lure them out into the parking lot, lure them out. Oh, this is where my mom is. And boom, take the woman with them. And then there goes into like months and months of going missing and trauma and sexual assault and rape and abuse and all of these things. And it's like, I was just like in shock because I'm like, now we're using children to lure women so women can be victims from men. I'm like, how mentally screwed up do you have to be to do this on such a large scale? Who knows what's happening to that child or what kind of life that child's living, and then has to be a part of this sickness as well. Like, I was like shocked. On top of shocked, I was like, my nerves were a little bit shot because I was like, the guy was just like on it. Like, and I was like, and I was telling my husband, I said, honey, I know that you think I'm being paranoid. You know, my husband didn't say I was being paranoid, but I could tell in his face, he was like, honey, that guy's not taking you. Like, I'm here. But I told him, I said, there could be other people here. Like, he's getting
now,
closer.
because you showed up, maybe he'll go after somebody else.
Right. And that's what he did. He started, when Jamie showed up, he started like backing up. He went to other aisles. Then he passed us, and then you couldn't find the guy. I'm like,
right. So there you
5
go.
minutes ago,
there you go.
Like, on my shoulder, you know, like so inappropriate. And you know, it's just awful feeling that you have to walk around as a woman, you know, wondering, what am I doing? Or, you know, do I have something that I can call somebody? Or do I have something I can use to protect myself? Like, it's terrifying to live like that. And I don't think women should live like that. I mean, these are horrible instances. I remember, I was never date raped, but I remember drinking when I was younger, and a friend of a friend to try taking advantage of that, suggested to take me home in a cab. This is how it all went down. I had to get home. Said, I'll take a cab with her in New York. And I was grateful enough because the cab driver did nothing while I was yelling in the back seat. I was able to get out, like open the door. And when I did, the cab driver stopped, mostly probably because he thought someone was going to fly out, not because he was trying to help me. And I got out and I went into like a corner store, like a bodega. And those guys that were standing, hanging out outside, ended up protecting me and taking me to like this pizzeria that I knew the owners, and they called my parents. And it was like, what the fuck just
Could you
happened?
imagine what would have happened to you if none of that, like,
right, what would have happened to me? It's like this craziest thing. And I always keep that in the back of my mind because I'm like, that happened to me amongst friends. Not that that person was a friend, but that was a person that my friends
that they trusted. Yep, that they trusted.
And so they felt comfortable saying, yeah, take her home. I would take her home, but if you want to do it, that's fine. You know, there was that level of comfort, and something like that happened to me. And I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't naked. Even if I was naked, it was uncalled for. Because there was nothing that prompted me to say that I was in consent. There was nothing that prompted me to say that this was okay. And the whole time, it was just me. And I remember, this is like times of the pagers, you know, and I remember hearing my pager on the floor of the cab, just buzzing, like people were paging me because it was taking me forever to get home. and call them and say, hey, I just got here. Because if it was not that the door flung open, I don't know what would have happened.
But that's just, it's sad that we live in that kind of society, that this is how we live. Like we always have to be hyper vigilant. We can't, take a drink, and we can't do this and we can't do that. When, like you've been saying, Nikki, where's the prevention? Where's the investment in prevention? Where's the education? Where's the support for the young ladies to tell them that, like you said, Giselle, even if I'm naked, even if it's 3 a.m., I'm naked and I'm in your bed, I can still say no. And you still have to respect that. It doesn't matter. So Nikki, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of shout out your organization and what you're doing, and kind of give everybody some last thoughts about, what do we do to be part of the change and be part of positive forward movement in this.
Awesome. Thank you. I just want to say, Giselle, listening to you, I think we called out a couple of things, right? That like we as a culture have this idea that it's like this stranger danger, right? And like, yes, that is real, but like, again, violence usually is happens, like sexual violence is usually perpetrated by somebody that we know, right? And so really kind of like being mindful of that. And then also hearing you talk about how you have to show up in the world, and part of our identity is we're showing up as women, and how that itself is trauma, right? Like the fact that we have to constantly be on guard and worry about our safety is trauma in itself, right? I mean, even me, like when I walk to my car, like, and this is something I used to do when I was like out on the track, but I always have my keys in between.
I think that's just the city person thing, because I know I do it.
That's universal.
Like, keys in your eyeball if you come near me, right? Like, but just the fact that we have to do that, right? Like, is trauma. And like, listening to you say the cab driver did nothing. So I think when we're talking about like positive movement, it's really about like engaging our community and teaching them to be like not just silent bystanders, right? Like active allies in preventing and disrupting this. When we talk about bartenders, the reality is perpetrators position themselves in places where they have access to victims. So be that a bartender that can drug people's drinks and sexually assault them, be that in places where people have substance use disorder and are coming for treatment, or overseeing food pantries, or right, like they position themselves where they have access to victims, and often position themselves as the good guy. And so I think, forward movement, how we like move forward, is really engaging our community to stand with women, belief survivors, and being an ally is an action, right? It's action. And so giving people like tools, like these are the things that we need you to do, and it's belief survivors, support survivors, and hold perpetrators accountable. And as far as LIFT in our organization, we're having a summit on June 30th to talk about those kind of like prevention pipelines into prostitution and poverty, and how all of these different kind of vulnerabilities intersect. And so I think I'm excited to have that conversation. We're also holding our annual fundraiser June 3rd at the Manor, so this Friday. And if people are interested in attending and learning more about what we're doing, can follow us on our Facebook, which is like Living in Freedom Together, or our Instagram, which is LIFT Worcester.
Thank you so
guys
much,
for having
Nikki.
me.
And thank you so much for being so honest and open. Giselle, as the mom of 3 young ladies, what do you want? What do you want to leave this conversation with?
Yeah, I think that Nikki really hits it on the head with, the education, which I think we've been kind of, pushing this entire conversation between the 3 of us, making sure that we're not just telling women these are the things we do to prevent rape, but we're also telling young boys these are the things that you do that so that way it's anti-rape, right? These are things that If women don't feel comfortable, do not pursue. If women say no, do not continue. If you see this happening to women that you know or strangers, intervene. I want to say that, you know, we have to educate the masses equally, because on one side, it's like we're growing individuals, and I know people hate the term toxic masculinity, but it really is that. It's about control. It's about putting, you know, the men over the women, and women being inferior to men in this case. And I think that if the more of that we can take away, I think the more of a clearer path young boys have to achieving a level of maleness that is appropriate, that is universally kind to anyone, and that protects their women. You know, I think that there's none of that happening, and it's scary. And so for me, raising three girls, I tell them the same, and I tell them, you know, to protect themselves at all costs. And I tell them at the same time, exactly what Nikki was saying. I tell Brooke, I shouldn't have to say this to you, but I kind of have to. It's like this weird, you know, unfortunate kind of conversation that we have to have. And like Jen and I, you know, like our conversation with our kids getting pulled over by cops, you know, when they're at driving age, that conversation we have to have about being courteous and don't agitate the cop. These are things that we should not be talking about. There shouldn't be any of this conversation happening, but there is. And what's crazy to me is that we're not having any conversations with men. Boys are not being raised with any conversation, nothing about against law enforcement, nothing about against women, nothing about how to treat other people. None of that is happening. And so it falls on the burden of mothers and fathers that are raising girls to put all of these kind of messaging in front of them, so that way they're aware for themselves. But it has to be an equal playing field. We have to have this conversation on a broad scale between young boys and young girls, and talk about it. I'm all for teaching sexual comprehension classes early on, because that's how we better understand. The more we can understand about ourselves and our self boundaries, the more we then respect other people. If I don't want these things done to me, if I find that these things are breaking down my boundaries and crossing my lines, then I know what that person feels like. And so the growth of empathy happens, and that's really what solves problems. That's what solves all social justice problems, right? Like, let's create some empathy. Let's have these conversations. Let's not be scared, because I think we need to also change the vernacular between sex education and sexualizing education.
Mhm.
They are not the same. They are not the same. I hear things all the time. Oh, your daughter has like a, you know, not, my kids all like are 90 grudge right now. So they're all baggy pants and long t-shirts and all that stuff. But, you know, I see young girls, and it's like, yes, you're showing them to be empowered, but in a way, is this over sexualizing a child? Can it be? Yes. And so understanding that cross between, are we sexualizing something? Is this just a comprehension of anatomy and physiology, kind of like basic science methods? There's a difference. And I think that if we can break that conversation down to our generation, so that way we can help our children, and then have them be at a space and a mindset that they can then help future children, I think we'll be okay. But we have to stop, you know, sexualizing the term sex, because that's not what that is all the time.
Well, it's interesting because I watched a documentary yesterday, and it talked, and they were actually, the person went to talk to a priest, and they were talking about sex, and the priest said that every interaction you have is sexual, because sex is intimacy. So all your relationships have intimacy. And, you know, like you said, it's about having empathy for the other person, right? Empathy for the experience of the other person, and stepping in when you see things that are wrong, and using your voice, and becoming a true ally, which, Nikki, like you said, means action. So I want to make sure that I do, you know, provide some resources as we close out this episode. So sexual violence can have psychological, emotional, and physical effects on the survivor. These effects are not always easy to deal with, but can be managed with the right help and support. Learning more can help you find the best form of care to begin your healing process. If you suspect that you were drugged, you can take steps to preserve the evidence for an investigation, Many of these drugs leave the body quickly within 12 to 72 hours. If you can't get to the hospital immediately, save your urine in a clean, sealable container as soon as possible and place it in the refrigerator or freezer. Call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 800-656-HOPE, which is 64673, to find a hospital or medical center that can provide you with a sexual assault forensic exam and test your blood and urine for substances. To speak with someone who is trained to help, call the National Sex Assault Hotline, which again is 800-656-HOPE, or you can chat online at online.rainn.org. So we are Don't Touch My Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Don't Touch My Podcast. And we are DTM Podcast on Twitter and don'ttouchmypodcast.com. Or you can reach out to us directly at info@don'ttouchmypodcast.com. Thank you so much, Nikki, for joining us. So thank you for joining us for this special episode. Stay safe, stay sane. This is Don't Touch My Podcast. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Giselle.
Thank you for having me.